Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Willard, for having me. What I'm going to do is start a drawing. And I'll talk more later and we'll have question and answer. I'll talk about my life a little bit later on, but I want to first start a drawing. We'll probably do 10 or 15 minute increments. And as I get going, I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing, and then eventually we'll have a question and answer later on, and I'll go into details with some life stories and things that hopefully. Willard made me sound pretty good. I appreciate that, Willard. So what I'll do. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Turn this way. Then this way. This way a little. Yeah. That's good. I'm going for big shapes first. I generally start with an egg because the head's kind of shaped like an egg. Drawing's all about learning to see, really. You need to look. It's all about the values, the lights and darks. Hopefully you don't get bored just watching for a little bit. You'll probably enjoy it. The fun part is messing up a pristine piece of paper. Then it's fair game. And it'll get better for you this way, hopefully. I try to start out real loose and keep my hand moving around. I do a lot of squinting because I'm trying to see values, lights, and darks. That's good. Is that a rose? No, what is it?
It's a carnation.
Carnation. I'm indicating the carnation there. And things I look at, just to give you an example. I'm always looking for shapes of shadows. Any kind of shape that I can identify. So that little flower will first be just a circle. But I'm looking at things like, if I put a straight line up there, where does the flower hit? It's right around the edge of the mouth. See that? So I'll either make an actual note of that, or I'll just make a mental note of that. Those are the kinds of things that I have to explore. And it's real dark over in there. You got the shadows in the face. The shadows in the hair are darker than the shadows in the face. Edge of the eye comes down here to the edge of that carnation, flows into the side of the head. I'm making a little note of that line. And I do a lot of guess marks. If I'm not sure about a line, I'll just make two guesses at it and eventually choose the correct one, hopefully. Little edge of the mouth. See, I've lined my nose up, lined my eyes up. By the way, I'm using soft bind charcoal, and I have a fancy brass holder. here a great model. It gets dark back in there. I don't see a lot, so I don't draw a lot. The braid shadows are darkest there, and then it's just a bunch of stuff. I'm going to look at it as values, just shapes coming down there. I have to always think about composition a little bit. This area comes into the side of her face just below the mouth, so make a note of that there. And then her line of her shirt, something like that. So something like that, almost like suggesting. A demo drawing is not going to be a really finished drawing. Oh yeah. Your eyes are beautiful, blue.
Yeah, she does her pretty.
Nostril. Now, I'm doing some delineation because there are lines there. This comes down, goes in. Ear comes in just about the top of it. I only see a little suggestion of the ear. There's a shadow that shoots across her there, that it shoots a straight line. So that really helps me because I can just draw a line and draw the shape of that shadow and then fill it in. This is what's called a stump. It's made for this. I like charcoal because it's very versatile. I can blow this off of that piece of paper if I want to, and sometimes I have to. I'm squinting a lot. See, if I squint, all this is kind of in shade back in there, for starters. This is so fun to me. I love drawing. Then, the eraser is a good drawing tool, aside from just being an eraser. I'll show you. I can shape this gum eraser any way I want to make marks. So let's see. For example, there's a light on her eyelid. There's a light over there. I can even roll it around and shape it and pick that highlight out of her eye. So it's a drawing tool as well as an eraser. Okay, let's take a short break. Thank you. So this is what I call the block end. I'm just trying to get the basic shapes and proportions, and then I'll start, refining it more and more. But by the same process, I just keep feeling my way around these forms. And look and trying to get the values, the light and shadow, shapes. I try to look not so much at the subject as much as I do values and shapes. The same way with painting. If I'm painting a landscape, or I'm looking at shapes. In the case of painting, you would be looking at values and color. In the case of a drawing, I'm just looking for the values, the lightness and darkness of things. And I'm always trying to find either shadow shapes or light shapes, identify them and just draw that shape. An eye is kind of like football, an almond. So that's the way I try to think. And if you do that long enough and get your shapes reasonably right, it begins to look like your subject. A lot of people don't know about sharpening charcoal, and it's a valuable thing. You buy charcoal and it's just a vine with a dull edge. But for drawing, I sharpen it slowly on a piece of sandpaper. Make a long tapering point. That way, I can use it on its side for broad marks, or I can use it like this for very fine, delicate lines. Right? So you can get a lot of variety of marks with that. Much more than if you don't. I may use flat ones and do things like this. Because it is that dark. Any questions so far?
What's your paper?
This paper is, I use a lot of Strathmore. I just got it. This is not Strathmore. Charcoal paper, you need a toothy paper for charcoal.
Like pastel paper?
Either a watercolor paper, cold pressed. You need, that's a good question. You need a paper with a little tooth for charcoal to be effective. It's not useful on a smooth paper, so don't even bother. So any texture, any paper with some texture, some tooth.
Judith has absolutely stunning eyes, as you know, trying to draw them, but how can you interpret those kind of blue eyes with charcoal?
Well, again, everything translates into values,
Right.
the relative lightness or darkness of things.
So how would you do the pupil, making it, would use the eraser and just making it light, or is it indifferent?
Well, I base it on what I see.
Yeah.
So at first, her eyes are just a ball,
Yeah.
a little dot in there with a little value there. Because they're light, it's going to be a light value.
Yeah.
If they were dark, it would be like that and then like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's all values.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not trying to think I'm trying to think value and
I
shapes.
got you.
It's like when I paint a tree, I'm not thinking of it as a tree, I'm thinking of it as shapes of values and color shapes. So, I mean, that's almost enough right there to explain that the subject has light eyes, right? And I've barely done anything. Now, for a demo purpose, I won't develop the drawing too far. Because, I mean, I could go on for hours, but I don't want to bore you. And I just try to do enough to show you the procedure. To make it more detailed, all I would do is continue doing this for hours. Zeroing in, making small changes. I try to get the big shapes first and then start narrowing in on things. And I'm always reassessing values. Is this area lighter than this area? Is this area lighter than that? And the other important thing I try to note to myself, I always ask myself, what is the darkest thing up there? The darkest thing so far is over in here. We've got a dark nostril. There's a little darkness there. There's a little darkness there. So that's the way I'm thinking throughout this process. We'll try it. Okay. We'll do one more sitting, and then we'll do some question and answer talk. And yeah, you're doing great. This way, that straight on. There. There you go. What? Is it me? Top of her mouth is a straight line. That's amazing. Very unusual.
Those darker lines you just put in are really starting to reflect the nuances of her face, her character.
Good. Well, see, I'm trying to do all this in a short time. So normally I don't get to that this quickly, but that's the nature of a demo.
Well, it's just interesting how so few marks can make that
Yes,
happen.
and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm following these forms around. See, I see a little circle there. So I just draw a circle. And one thing that I think of it like this. I'm trying to crawl around the forms on her face. I'm trying to feel them, almost like I'm a little insect crawling around
Touching.
the forms of her face. There's a dark line there. Now here's a good example of drawing with the eraser. See, I can draw lines. Just trying to indicate the hair a little bit up here. I do a lot of squinting my eyes to see values. You okay? You're a great mom. I'm using a soft vine charcoal. That's really it. And charcoal is amazing to me because it's so, you can do so much with charcoal. You can make charcoal look like a graphite drawing, or you can make it look like a very expressive, loose, whatever. You can make very dark marks with it. You can make very light marks. Okay. Here's a highlight there, it's a circle. So I know everything around that is a little lighter than that. Here's how I'll do that. But I'm going to preserve that highlight. You see that? It's like a little ball of light there. And it's darker over here. I'm shaping the eraser. You have such pleasant expression. And I could do this all night long.
Earlier you remarked on how quiet it is. How do you normally like to work?
That's a good question. I normally play music. Okay, let's take a break. Thank you. I normally play music, CDs,
Particular genre?
all over the place, really. So you see, I could pick away at this. If I'm doing a drawing, say I'm doing a portrait of someone, I will generally work 2 hours the first day, and then I will do another day or two of 2-hour sessions. And sometimes I'll tweak the drawing without the model. That's if I'm doing it from life. Sometimes I'm just doing a sketch for an hour or two, and that's it. If I'm doing something that requires a higher degree of finish, I just work longer on it. I mean, I could keep on going. I kind of like that, though. I mean, it's got a little bit of life to it. It's, you know, it's not highly detailed, but sometimes that's all you need. I mean, sometimes my sketches, I feel like, have more life to them than the more finished things. So drawing was my first love. When I was real little, drawing was my first love, and I was at an early in my life. I fell in love with drawing. I had several mentors in my life. Early on and later on, I was partly raised by my brother-in-law Ben Long. Some of you know the frescoes, and my nephew's back here, Tolly. That's Ben and my sister's son. But I was partly anyway. Ben is an art, and Ben was a mentor to me early on. I lived with them in Italy. I was born in Monroe, and I was taken to Italy, Florence, Italy, to go to high school. I went to a normal high school, the American School of Florence. It was not an art school. I did study art history, but I was in love. I wanted to do what Ben did at an early age. So I hung out around him. I worked with him. I watched him. He wasn't necessarily a regular teacher, but he worked hard and he let me work with him. And all of his friends. There were a lot of artists around, Ben's friends, and that's who I hung out with. I worked with them as much as I could. I wanted to do what they did. I wanted to be them. I fell in love with the old masters at an early age, the Renaissance. I was surrounded by those guys living in Florence, living in the heart of the Renaissance. I fell in love with Michelangelo, the drawings of those guys in particular. Now, Ben and many of my teachers urged me to just draw for years to learn values. I was taught that drawing was the foundation of it all. So I just listened to what they said and focused on, I just drew for years before I ever picked up a paintbrush. I graduated high school. My formal training was at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was the first art school in America. It has a great tradition. Thomas Eakins taught there, a lot of great American painters. But backing up a little bit, because this ties me to Blowing Rock. When I was a little kid, my sister and Ben we lived in this little house next door. What's the name of it?
Springhaven Inn.
Springhaven Inn. We rented that old house. I was a little kid, and Ben and my sister brought an Italian guy over, and they opened up a frame shop. And then at another point in my life, around that period, I was young, my sister and Ben rented the caretaker's house of Westglow, the former home of Elliot Dangerfield. Dangerfield's grandson is here, Joe Delaney, who I've had the fortune of knowing, and he let me pick his brains a lot years later about his grandfather, Elliot Dangerfield. So Ben and Diane rented that old studio that used to sit up behind the house. It's no longer there. Joe, you correct me if I'm wrong. And then we rented the old caretaker's house. And the reason I tell you that is because Elliot Dangerfield's paintings had a big impact on me. I was a little kid, and to me, he was the first artist of national notoriety that painted these hills of North Carolina. And that meant a lot to me as a little boy, a kid. And going back to even earlier than that, when I lived in Monroe, and interestingly, part of the Dangerfield family's from Union County. Joe can correct me if I'm wrong. And I always thought that was cool because I'm from little old Monroe. And what's interesting to me is that Elliot Dangerfield in my life there were a lot of similarities. He taught in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia College of Art, or one of the schools in Philadelphia. And he had a studio in New York and would commute, I guess, Joe, right?
Yes.
And then, and of course he had 3 homes here and summered here and painted these mountains that I paint. And there was a store in Charlotte when I was even going way back. And Ben used to take me to Charlotte to this art supply store run by Leon Stacks. And Joe, I know you know more about him than I do, but Leon always had little Elliot Dangerfield paintings in there for about $300. They were little oil sketches. And when I was a little boy, I just loved those things. And then, of course, I began to realize that a lot of the generation of my parents and grandparents had Dangerfield paintings hanging in their house. And I used to seek them out. So that's why Blowing Rock is so special to me.
Well, as an educator, empirical learning is obviously key in your experience.
Yes.
It was all about exposure and just, environment.
Yeah.
Who knows what you would have been if you had
And I learned a lot in classroom type settings, but I feel like I learned more by watching artists do what you just watched me do, because I used to seek people out. One of my early earliest instructors told me, he said, find people who have something you want and bug the hell out of them. He said, see what they eat, how they live, how they work. And that's what I did. Because a lot of times artists do things privately that they don't necessarily do in the classroom. So if you watch them, you really see more than you will hear out of their mouths, at least in my experience. But Ben is a great draftsman, and he was my first mentor, really. Because in Monroe, I didn't know. I think the first artist I ever heard of was Andrew Wyeth in a magazine or something. So Elliot Dangerfield was alive in my life, even though he died in 1932. And then I got to meet his family, like Joe, and he was nice enough to share his personal life with me. He calls him grandfather. I did go to Appalachian State briefly for 1 year, but it was after I graduated high school in Florence, Italy. I came back here. I knew that I was going to be going to the Pennsylvania Academy, so I took a year off and drank beer and boom, or boy. But I did a lot of drawing and painting at that time. I wasn't a real serious art student here because I knew I was going to the Academy the following year. And I had heard about the Academy from a friend of mine who is a few years my senior. He's a very successful artist named Bo Bartlett, who studied with Ben briefly. And Bo told me about it. And it was the more traditional art school at the time. But they opened, my eyes were open to a lot of things there because they had a very diverse faculty. They had abstract painters, not just classical or representational painters. And that planted a seed in me because I grew up around Renaissance, classical type stuff. And when I was really young, I didn't care about modern art. So the Academy was very good for me in that way. It broadened me and opened me. And I'm thankful for that. Questions?
I have a question. I see and hear what you're talking about, the form and the value, but at some point you give it a spark. It becomes.
Yeah, you have to,
Line.
I mean, well, you have line and values to work with.
Right.
So, and like I said, if I had more time, I would continue tweaking it. But I wanted to, it's a demo.
Are you looking for something in your sitter that you try to convey?
Definitely. I mean, I'm very picky about my sitters. I just got lucky here. Some people are not as interesting to draw. But I love doing portraits. I do a lot of portraits for myself, for friends. Portrait commissions I do, but it's a whole different thing because you have to answer to people's vanity. John Singer Sargent, one of the great portrait painters, he said that a portrait commission is a painting with a little something wrong with it. And it's largely true. But I love doing them. I think, it's all about finding the right artist for you. There's a whole nother art to flattery.
You mentioned you've been drawing since you were 7, so do you have any of your early work?
I have some. I really see Ben, my brother-in-law's sister, started dating, I think, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. They were, you correct me if I'm wrong, they started dating when I was really young. Ben was from Statesville, and ironically, that's where I live now. I think they met on a blind date at Myrtle Beach or Ocean Drive or something like that. So he came into my life at an early age, and it just really appealed to me what he did. I don't know why. And I never, ever considered doing anything else. I just wanted that. And all along, I was lucky. I had a lot of really good mentors in my life, artists of different sorts. But in a way, I would seek them out. And Florence, Italy, had a lot of artists. There were a lot of expatriate artists living there. A lot of young artists went to study there. So I benefited from that as well. And Ben was there studying with a fresco master named Pietro Anigoni, and I was able to experience him a little bit. In fact, he became like a god to me. I used to hide Anigoni book under my bed, and Ben and Diane wouldn't let me look at it until I got my homework done. But he was a great draftsman. I remember one time I finally got to. Well, I was around him when he did some frescoes because Ben was assisting him. But Ben told me I should put together a portfolio and call his secretary and make a real meeting with Anigoni, and I did. I was scared to death. I put together a little folder of terrible drawings. And I went down there to meet with him, and he wrote me a recommendation, because at some point they put me in North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. I don't remember why. But that didn't last long. So he looked at my drawings, and all he would say, he was like he talked like this, and all he said is, "You must draw every day." But those things were a big deal to me. And Ben was there to study fresco painting with him. I had my first show at the, Union County Courthouse, on the steps of the Union County Courthouse. I did these terrible drawings, but I think I wrapped them in plastic, and I had an actual show on the steps of the Union County Courthouse. I was 9, 10, somewhere in there. I made some good candy money. They were like $1 each. And I got a article in the Monroe newspaper. I learned how to dress like an artist in Italy with the beret, and it was pretty effective. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you. You're a great mom.